All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network's Veterans Corner. I'm your host again, retired Army First Sergeant Paul Holbert, and of course, we are coming to you live from cold and snowy Northern Virginia. For those of you who have been watching the show, you know that our show highlights veterans, their careers, their experiences, and what they're doing within their communities today and after retirement or leaving the service. So we've got an interesting guest tonight, and we'll get to him in just a minute. But before we get started, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors again to our show. We've got two wonderful sponsors. First, Quest Jewelers of Merrifield, Virginia. Pete and Juan Tane, the owners of Quest Jewelers, have quality material, quality jewelry, and can make those custom pieces that'll really send that special message. So if it's something nice you're really looking for, visit questjewelers.com or call Pete or Juan and tell them what you want, and they can sure fix you up. Our other sponsor I want to thank is definitely familiar with the show and its contents. I want to thank Nationwide IT Services, NIS, CK Park and his crew. He's the owner of a service-disabled veteran-owned small business and an 8A certified small business by the Small Business Administration. They specialize in IT, communications, administrative support, strategic planning, and leadership and training. So if your organization is in need for any assistance with those types of topics, take a look at the webpage and you will see CK Park and his information across the screen. Give him a call and ask him to help you out. So we just want to say thank you again to our sponsors for sponsoring our veteran show. So let's talk about tonight's guest, and we'll meet him. I want to welcome retired Air Force Colonel Vincent Fagan. Vince was commissioned through the Reserve Officer Training Corps at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania and spent the next part of his life in a variety of assignments, including support of Operation Desert Storm and as a C-5 Galaxy pilot. Vince actually has amassed over 6,000 military flying hours in both training and airlift aircraft, which is kind of incredible. He has a Bachelor of Science degree from Lehigh University, as I mentioned. He also has a Master's of Aeronautical Science from Embry-Riddle University. Can't talk tonight, it's too cold here. As well as attendance and graduation from a number of the military staff and war colleges and command courses. So, Vince, I want to take a moment to say thank you for coming on the show, and it's good to see you.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. Thanks for the invite, and thanks for doing this type of venue for veterans and for the folks that listen in. I really appreciate you making this effort. It's terrific.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really been good to see some of the guests that we've had on, and not too long ago, I had contacted you, and then I had said, well, yeah, come on, Vince, I want to get you on the show, and I'm glad you finally agreed to do it. So it's good to have you on. Now, you're a career Air Force officer, and of course, me being a retired Army guy, I crossed paths with a whole bunch of you guys during my time, but you had kind of a unique career, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I think you were commissioned, what, back in 1985? Is that when you were commissioned?
1980.
Oh, I'm sorry, 1980. I was thinking it was 85. So you were commissioned just about the same time I joined the Army. So we kind of came on board around the same time. So how did you end up in the Air Force, and secondly, as a pilot?
Well, I think the first seeds were planted when I was a young boy, just watching television and seeing shows that centered around the military. For example, Combat, which was about infantrymen in the European theater.
Yeah.
But the big thing that convinced me that this is something that I wanted to do, and I was really a calling, was I had a middle school teacher and a high school teacher who were retired Army Air Force colonels and aviators. My middle teacher, Colonel Bud Marston, was a hump pilot. He flew the hump in Pacific Theater, Indochina Theater in World War II, and
wow.
high school ROTC instructor, Colonel Bill Reynolds, was a B-17 bombardier in the 8th Air Force in Europe.
Hmm.
And I just found both men tremendously motivating and informative, and not just from their military career, but the way that they led their lives. And they definitely motivated me. I knew after meeting them and working with them for years that it was something that I wanted to do. And I stayed friends with Colonel Marston for 20 years and Colonel Bill Reynolds until he passed about 9 years ago.
Wow. So that's how it all started for you. You know, it's kind of amazing because I hear a number of our guests come on, and if when I ask them, what made you decide to go into the military, or how did you get into this? Usually, about half of them have some story to tell about someone who inspired them when they were young to do what it is they did. So yeah, that sounds like a pretty familiar story from a lot of our veterans. It seems like we find somebody that we look up to, and the next thing you realize, geez, what am I doing here? Because I remember that's what happened to me. When my dad was killed on active duty, I decided later on I was going to go in the Army just to try it out to see. And I remember getting off that bus of basic training, and 30 seconds off the bus, I had a drill sergeant screaming my name. And I thought, geez, what am I, God, what am I doing here? And then what happened almost 22 years later, I finally retired. So it's always interesting to hear, some of the other veterans talk about why they got in and how they got in. So did they inspire you to get into the aviation field as well?
Yes, I think so. I mean, both of them had been aviators. Like I said, Bill Reynolds, who I was probably closer to, spent more years associated with him, had been a bombardier. I didn't even know he was a bombardier for the first few years that I knew him. I knew that he was a crew member, but it was probably I'd probably known him for 5 or 8 years before I realized that he was a bombardier and not a pilot. But I guess there was something that I wanted to try, was to be a pilot. And
yeah. Yeah, I've heard a lot of stories from guys I knew that went in the Air Force. Yeah, I wanted to fly, but my eyes weren't good enough, and this and that, and they ended up staying and doing other things. So at least you were fortunate enough to make your dream come true. So you got in, and I know of course, you went through quite a bit of training, and as you started flying, I mean, you flew quite a number of different aircraft. Can you kind of share some of those with us?
yes, so I went through pilot training in 1981 and flew 2 different aircraft there, T-37 and then the T-38. And then my first assignment out of there was the CT-39 Saberliner at Andrews Air Force Base.
Hmm.
And then I was initial cadre in the C-12F. They transitioned the T-39s out, and we bought Learjets and King Airs to replace them. Did that for 3 years and then went into the C5. And I actually spent 20 years flying the C5 and finished my military flying career in that aircraft.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to talk about that in a few minutes too, because that is an incredible aircraft. So you were talking about the C-12,
Yes.
which is a Learjet, right?
No, that's the King Air. The C-21 is the Learjet. Yes.
Yeah. Well, the C-12 is a small, like private jet, correct? If I'm
It's a
right.
turboprop. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember. I was stationed in an Army Aviation battalion in Korea back in 1986, and I went TDY, and I had a chance to go TDY with one of our helicopter pilots, and we got stranded TDY, and it just so happened he had a friend of his that flew the 12s. And we met him at the airfield, and he flew us back up to where we were supposed to be. So it was a nice experience. I thought, this is what it's like to be in the Air Force, huh?
I think every branch of the service flies the C-12. Even
Yeah.
Guard has some. So
Yeah, I mean, I was so used to spending all my time on Hueys and Chinooks and the rotors that was my first opportunity to fly in an aircraft like that with the military. So that was interesting. Now you went on though as you were flying, you went on to fly during Desert Storm too, didn't you?
I did, yes.
Yeah. What did you do there?
Uh, Strategic airlift. So I was part of my C5 years. We were mobilized by then I had transitioned to the Air Force Reserve, and we were mobilized in the first week of September 1990 and stayed mobilized for about 11 months until the summer of 91. Flew about 1,000 hard hours that year
Hmm.
and did airlift to and from the Middle East. It's part of
Yeah.
the
So were you shuttling in the C5? Were you shuttling troops and equipment? I mean, I imagine.
I took a little bit of everything, Paul.
Yeah.
We At times it was bombs and bullets. There was one
Yeah.
time that the entire airplane was filled with Campbell soup.
Wait a minute. The whole C5 was filled with Campbell's soup?
Pretty much. It was right before Thanksgiving, and they were trying to get as much of this stuff into the Middle East for the folks. But as we got closer to the time that the action began in January, the cargo
Uh,
had transitioned in nature to
yeah.
more offensive.
I'm trying to visualize in my head the entire cargo department of compartment of a C5 filled with Campbell's soup. I mean, good gosh, that's got to be an incredible sight. So yeah, I know we were shuttling back and forth, and the reason why I was kind of interested in your time during Desert Storm, of course, is because I was there with Second Armored Cav, except for instead of flying around in an aircraft, I was bumping across the desert in an armored vehicle with a bunch of tanks. And I have to say, we were kind of envious of you guys because we could see the contrails of the B-52s going overhead, flying into Iraq, saying, "Man, we know those guys are nice and warm up there in the planes," and we're down on the ground freezing our behinds off in December, especially at night, December, January. But I still remember those days of looking up and kind of being a little envious, saying, geez, it'd be nice to be up in that warm aircraft right now. You got a bathroom you can use. You got a coffee maker. You got, so you Air Force guys were living it up. I got to tell you.
Well, and we fully understand and agree with that. You'll get no argument here. We know that we definitely had it better. At least the airlift crews definitely had it better than the Army and the Marines. And my hat's off to you all. I know it was.
Well, it's not that. It's just kind of funny because I knew some Air Force guys that came in and they took a trip up to where we were at to come out and see what was going on. They flew in on some Chinooks to our regimental support squadron because they wanted to see what was going on out in the desert. And I was talking to one of them. He was a young staff sergeant, and he was telling me, he said, having grown up around the Air Force, I told him, I said, yeah, I said, so how are you guys doing back at the port? Are you enjoying your hotel? And he looked at me, he goes, yeah, I got to tell you, man. He said, after coming out here and seeing where you guys are living, he said that hotel's going to seem like the plaza when I get back. So we had a good laugh about that. But it's all in fun because no matter where we're serving or which branch we're all serving, and everybody has their part to do. But it's always fun to take those jabs and have fun with each other, isn't
Absolutely.
it? Yeah. So you were flying the C5 back and forth for Desert Storm. I'd like you to kind of share with our audience a little about the C5 because I was just a kid living on Hickam Air Base in Hawaii, and when they started flying those things. And I remember the first time those things started coming into Hickam, you could hear them. It seemed like no matter where you were at, you could hear those darn things. And when they came into land, just to see them was incredible. So can you share with our listeners a little bit about that plane and what puts people in such awe about it?
Sure. So for a long time, it was the world's largest airplane, with a gross takeoff weight of 769,000 pounds. If it was wartime ops, and then we could take it up to 840,000 pounds.
Mm.
It does things that no other aircraft in the world can do still, even though it's now, gosh, I have to do the math, but some like 54, 55 years old now.
Yeah.
Anybody that's ever seen pictures of it, it can be loaded from the front or from the back. It can kneel, so the aircraft can be lowered to the ground to create a more gradual rise for like driving on vehicles or winching on helicopters, which carried. Has full air refueling capability, so really it has an unlimited range. I flew many missions that were 14, 15 hours length. And it can carry what's called outsized cargo. It's still the only aircraft that we fly that can handle some types of cargo for the military. So there are times we had the president's helicopters on board, both of them.
Yeah.
Scenes, we could handle very heavy equipment like a tank. Lots of room in there, 36 pallet positions, large crew.
Yeah, I mean that can you tell us how give the audience an idea, how long is that aircraft?
The aircraft's I think 246 or 247 feet long.
Jeez, yeah.
Off field, 222-foot wingspan.
Yeah, that's incredible. So
they just put on engines and avionics, so it isn't as noisy as you remember as a boy, Paul. It used to sound like a Hoover vacuum cleaner, but now the new engines are more powerful.
Well, I tell you what, that was one heck of a Hoover vacuum cleaner when I first heard it, because that was just incredible. I saw, of course, a number of them, and there's the troop carrier up in the upper deck, and I had the opportunity to fly on one time, but just once. And I was just in such awe of that aircraft and how the heck you guys could get something that huge off the ground when you see it. That's why it's always been something that's fascinated me. And, when I found out you flew those things, I thought, holy cow, I definitely got to talk to this guy and find out a little bit more about it. So you spent pretty much most of the rest of your career, once you got into C5s, flying those, right?
I finished my flying career in the C5 with a full 20 years in that. And then the last 5 years I was at the Pentagon.
Yeah, so I want to talk about the Pentagon when you come back, because I think you had an interesting assignment there that I think our listeners will find interesting. So we're going to take just a short break, and when we come back, we'll pick up our conversation with Vince. So for those of you in our audience, we'll be right back. All right. Welcome back, everyone. And you're listening to the Veterans Corner on the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network. We're talking with tonight's guest, retired Air Force Colonel Vince Fagan, who spent his career as an Air Force pilot. And let's continue the conversation. So, Vince, I know that before we took the break, you had mentioned that you spent some time around the Pentagon. And I think this is where you had one assignment that I found particularly interesting, where you were a White House social aide under the Reagan administration.
Actually, that was early in my career, Paul. I did that
Oh, okay.
3 to 85.
Gosh. Okay. Well, tell us about that, because that sounds pretty interesting.
Well, the White House always has about 30 to 35 military officers that serve as social aides. They perform a variety of functions during legislative, diplomatic, social functions at the White House. Each branch has about 6 or 7. So I was fortunate when I was based at Andrews, since I was close by.
Mhm.
You had to be single. I was not married at the time, and you had to be between the ranks of 02 and 04, and you could compete for this position. And I was fortunate and got selected. I was able to work in the Reagan White House for 2 years uh, during various things such as state dinners, bill signing ceremonies, all sorts of events like that. So it was a once in a lifetime opportunity. I really enjoyed the heck out of it.
Yeah. So give us an example of what you would do.
Well, golly, some of the assignments were odd, or some of them were interesting. My first night there, I was tasked to escort a longtime socialite in Washington to the White House, a guest of President Reagan.
Hmm.
So I got to go to Georgetown, pick her up in a White House limousine, come back to the White House, and then you basically make sure that the president's guests feel comfortable in the White House that evening, that they find their way from room to room. You introduce them to folks, that type of thing. One night, my assignment was I won't mention which governor this was, but a governor had ruffled the feathers of the president, and job was to keep him busy so that he wouldn't uh, upset the president that evening. So I got to talk with that particular governor for quite a while that evening.
Yeah, I can imagine that was probably interesting. Is there any one particular guest or experience that you could share with us and tell us who they are, that why you thought it was interesting?
I can tell you a few actually. So obviously, President Reagan, his career had been in movies, and I've always been an old time movie buff.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to talk with Ginger Rogers, with Buddy Ebsen,
Oh, oh,
with
wow.
James Cagney. So it was tremendous opportunity. I mean, how you just can't beat that. Let's see. So many of the other television stars. Ronald Reagan invited a lot of the Hollywood crowd as well. Oh, I know one other thing was 1983. I'm a big baseball fan. The
Hmm.
Orioles were in the 1983 World Series, so Rick Dempsey had been the World Series MVP. He got to come to the White House.
Okay.
A big Phillies fan, and they played the Phillies that year. So John Denny had won the Cy Young Award. He was at the White House that night. I got to chat with both of them, so that was a big deal for me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I could just see how interesting that would be. In fact, one of our previous guests was a career Air Force NCO who actually spent time working on Air Force Two. And, of course, he was telling us, some of the basic things and what an experience that was. So I can imagine you doing something like that at the White House as well. So that sounds pretty neat. So you finished your career and you continued on after you retired from the Air Force and ended up continuing your career in the public sector with the government, still working on um, how can I say, enhancing the safety of the national airspace for the flying public. Can you share a little bit about your second career with us?
Sure. It actually was my third career, if I could.
Third?
As I said, I transitioned to the Air Force Reserve in 1989 and did both the Air Force and the airlines. So I retired from both of those
Ah, okay.
and transitioned to the Federal Aviation Administration, where I worked in 3 different organizations there: the Air Traffic Organization, the Office of Quality Integration and Executive Services, and then I finished my last 6 years working in flight standards in a terrific division called the General Aviation Commercial Division, which was a great opportunity. We had really quite the variety of missions within that division. Everything from warbirds, sort of birds to fly and be able to carry passengers under special programs, unmanned aircraft systems. So that type of thing, everything from ultralights and everything came under that one division. It was very interesting to work with that. It's a great team, some really talented folks work in the Federal Aviation Administration.
Well, can you share for our audience who may not understand exactly what the mission is there? Because I know, the organization certifies aircraft and aircraft designs to fly, but then you also have the mission of oversight, inspection, continued operational safety, and all. So, can you just briefly share a little bit with the audience of what the mission is there and how that affects the safety of our flying public?
So within our specific division and flight standards in general, we would develop the policy in order to safely operate aircraft. Everything from pilot rules to medical rules to aircraft operating rules. And so the idea, and it was always done in a collaborative way. There is anybody that knows anything about government rulemaking, you can't do anything secretively. So it has to be publicly debated. And the idea is to create a rule that enhances the safety of the organization or the aviation, but at the same time does not handcuff it to the point where they can't operate. That's one of the axioms of the federal aviation's mission, is to make sure that you can fly, but fly safely. So our objective was to develop rules that allowed flying to continue robustly, but safely.
Yeah, I know a lot of people don't really think about it when they think about those roles in the government that um, the offices where you worked had, in making sure that every time somebody got on an aircraft, they got on one that had been approved, inspected, and had continual safety improvements and inspections and maintenance and upkeep to make sure that there weren't any disasters or crashes and I'm trying to sit here and think to myself, gosh, how many years has it been now since we've had a major aircraft crash in the United States? It's been quite a long time, I think.
It's been many years, and it's really a success story, Paul. The percentages that they measure them are so minuscule now that it's been at zero for many years. And it's our associate administrator for aviation safety that both you and I worked for, Peggy Gilligan, used to emphasize the word collaboration when she was in that position. She's now since retired, but we fully understand that the FAA has partners out there that we have to work with in the industry and with some of the other groups. And it has worked phenomenally well. We operate the safest air system in the world by far, and it's done so through a collaborative effort.
Yeah.
That's true with the general aviation safety too.
Yeah, I think it is kind of incredible when you look at the number of, I've walked in that building before, and of course this was pre-COVID, and you look at that map of the current air traffic across the United States, and you look at all those planes on that map, and you just think to yourself, my gosh, how incredible is that there are that many flights in the airspace over the United States at one time. And then, to have the safety record we do. And, that's a tribute to people like you that have given your life to that field and flying yourself, to make it that successful. So I know that you just retired again, right, from your job in the FAA. In fact, I guess the ink on your retirement paperwork probably isn't fully dry yet. So when exactly did you retire?
January 30th.
Oh goodness, yeah. What, about 2 weeks ago?
Correct.
Yeah, so now that you've retired again for the third time, because yeah, I forgot that you actually worked for the airlines too as well.
Mhm.
But now that you've retired for the third time, so what are you gonna do now? I mean, where does Vince go from here?
Well, first I'm going to catch my breath, just kind of relax for a while, I think. And we just finished building our home here where we are in southern Anne Arundel County, Maryland. So there's lots of work to do around here still to get things settled. I have two adult children, a daughter who just got married in October. Her and her husband live in Atlanta, and I have a son who is now in the Air Force and lives in Mississippi, and I hope to be able to spend some time visiting them. And I also would like to try to do some volunteer work. Not interested in getting another salary, but
Yeah.
uh,
You
perhaps.
don't you don't need the hassle and the stress after all these years, do you? So you said, and let me just go back for a second. You said that your son is stationed down in Mississippi. Is
He is.
is he by any chance at Keesler?
No, he's actually at Columbus Air Force Base, which is actually where I went through pilot
Oh, okay.
40 years ago. He just graduated from there in December and was selected to return there as what they call a FAPE, or a first assignment instructor pilot. So he'll be there for the next
Oh,
years teaching pilots.
yeah, so following in Dad's footsteps a little bit.
A little bit. He does
Yeah, the
everything
reason,
better than I could ever do.
well, the reason why I asked if he was at Keesler is because I have a younger brother that spent 8 years in the Air Force there at Keesler, and when he got out, he transitioned over um, to become an Air Force civilian, and he's been working in the training command down there in Keesler for probably about a good almost 20 years now.
It's a nice
So
base.
yeah, he's getting close to being able to retire soon himself. So that's why I was wondering, because I grew up right down there in Gulfport, and I was an Air Force brat for a little while, and yeah, and so we lived there and spent some time at Keesler. And in fact, Keesler was where I went to have all my medical stuff done before we changed duty locations and went out to Hawaii, to Hickam. So I'm pretty familiar with the coast. So I was just wondering if your son was down there at Keesler where my brother was.
He's not that far away.
Yeah, it's not very far at all. So yeah, like you said, you have a new house, and you're fixing it up. So what type of volunteer work are you interested in?
Well, I guess there's a couple of things that I'd be very interested in. One, I've always had an interest in finance and economics. That was my major in college, and accounting and economics. And I would like to try to teach or advise airmen,
Yeah,
or perhaps in another environment. I know the Air Force requires basic financial responsibility classes now for new airmen, and for people that transition, like for PCS, permanent change of station folks.
yeah.
So I've been trying to reach out to them to see if they could use some help. I would be doing it on a volunteer basis, and so I have to see if that's going to be feasible. There's a couple other organizations that I probably won't mention them now, but that I've always supported, and I hope to do some volunteer work with them too.
Yeah.
Is the USO. I will mention that, but I've always thought that the USO was a tremendous organization as far as helping out our servicemen. So,
Yeah, I tell you, I've got some stories about the USO as well, and traveling through airports and on my way to Korea one year and having to sleep on the floor in the airport. And one of the guys from the USO found me laying on the floor and got me up and took me across to the USO and found me a nice couch to lay on. And I mean, no, they've always been good. So you're right. That's a very good organization and the things that they do for the service members. So yeah, I can see where, you have some worthy endeavors here. But the good thing is now, after looking back at all the things that you've done and through your career and the contributions that you've made, I guess now you got to look at it and say you've kind of earned you a little bit of me time, right?
well, a little bit. I mean, I like to stay active, and so I'm looking forward to still doing something. Try to give back. I feel very, very fortunate for the life that I've been provided by this country, and so I definitely would like to give back.
Yeah, I have to second that, because I often tell my wife I feel really blessed about the position we're in and the lives that we have and that I've had even through my military career. And there's just so much that we get, that you get that sense that you do want to give back. And in fact, that just to share with you, that's one of the things that kind of led me to doing this show with Cece and the network here, is to try and give back to the veterans, highlight
Absolutely.
people like you and other veterans who have served the country and are now trying to even continue on after you retire, continue to do other things and volunteer. And I think it's important for people to see and for people to know. So yeah, I definitely second that, about wanting to give back. So let me just ask you, as we kind of wind down here, um, you've done so much and you've been to so many places, and you've had an incredible career flying. I mean, 6,000 hours in aircraft. And um, if you had any message or piece of advice you would want to give to our other veterans out there, or just our audience in general, what would it be? What would you like to share?
So, I, Paul, when I joined the Air Force, I had these great aspirations and expectations. And I can tell you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the Air Force greatly exceeded every one of those. I
Yeah.
went places and did things and met people that I could have never dreamt in my wildest imagination. And I feel very fortunate. It was very, very fulfilling. And I am a little concerned because like I mentioned, it is how I got into the Air Force by having these mentors, people
Mhm.
back in my day. There was a lot more folks that could identify with someone who was in the military and their family or that was in their neighborhood. And I'm not sure that our country has that connection anymore.
Yeah.
So what I would say is what you're doing right here is so important. And it's important for our country that we continue to get good people, men and women, into our services and to be able to share what it has meant to you and to me and to other veterans. The satisfaction that you can garner from a military career, I think, is important. So I hope we can continue that because it's such a tremendous opportunity, and so fulfilling to be able to be a part of something much greater than yourself.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. That's definitely a good point. Thank you. I think it is important that we continue those traditions on that, like you said, tend to be slipping, I think, in some areas. So you're right. I think that's important. So thank you for sharing that. And Vince, I also want to thank you for taking the time to come on our show and share your story with our audience. I know I appreciate it as well as I'm sure the other folks do. And we wish you the best as you finish and move into retirement and fixing up your house and traveling and whatever else you're going to do. So we do wish you the best. And again, let me thank you for coming on and taking the time to share with our audience.
Thank you very much, Paul, for the opportunity.
All right. Thank you, Vince. All right. And for those of you out there in the audience, especially for you veterans, I want to remind you, if you go for veterans information, you see the information and the website on the screen, the va.gov/service member benefits. If you go on there, you're going to find categories of benefits that you're able to take advantage of both while you're still in the service and benefits for after you leave the service. And we're finding that so many of our veterans aren't really completely sure what they're entitled to. So please take a few minutes to go to the va.gov website you see on the screen, and it will fill you in completely on all of the veterans benefits that you're entitled to as a service, either an existing or current service member or a private service member. So I want to thank you tonight for listening to the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network's Veterans Corner. And I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to the stories about our nation's veterans and their service, because as Vince just reminded us, some of that tends to slip away, and it's important to our country that we keep that in our minds and continue those services and those sacrifices. Veterans, as always, we want to thank you for your service to the country. Don't forget, if you're in need of help, call a Veterans Helpline. It's there whenever you need it. It's there on my website, on the GSN-DB Going Solo Network, where my show is. You will find all of that information. So please, if you need the help, don't be afraid to ask. I'm your host, retired Army First Sergeant Paul Holbert, and I want to invite you to visit my website, theliteraryvet.net, to take a look at my author's information, and visit the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network at goingsolomedia.com for more information about the show and other veterans programs. And with that, I will say good night, and we will see you on the next show.